Our professor was required to disclose to us the percentages of mental health problems and concerns in our industry. You know, they're like telling us right before we graduate, they're like, just so you know, 85% of lawyers hate their lives. You know, like 75% are alcoholics. 90% are unhappy. And I remember like looking around the room during my ethics course and being like, dude, F that, I'm out.
Welcome back to Racing Game Changers podcast. I have a very special guest with me today. His name is Andrew Pratt. He's a dear friend of mine. Andrew, welcome to the pod, man.
Thanks for having me, Zach. I'm really excited to be here, man.
I want to start this conversation off with you by talking about serendipity and the fact that you and I know each other is proof that it's real. Because how we met is very serendipitous, right? You literally, about 11 years ago, just about right now, my wife went to her first ayahuasca retreat, and you happened to be the driver to that event. And then 7 years later, because you guys were friends on social media, you stayed in touch, but 7 years later, we met at the beach at, community where I live on the lake. You're literally walking up, and my wife's like, I know him. And we met, and we just like started talking, and we realized, hey, you actually know each other for 7 years, and you were the dude that drove her to ayahuasca. And the fact that me and you were connected on social, but the first time we met in real life was because you bought a house in the same community where I live.
Yeah, man, it's pretty wild, serendipity, I believe in it. This was crazy. Yeah, from our perspective, it was like we had just bought a house in this community, finally found a place to settle down, and we had this community potluck beach party thing going on. And I think I had just recently started randomly following you with I think it was My Kid Entrepreneur at the time on Facebook, just because it popped up in my news feed. And I thought, I really like what this guy is doing. And I didn't know how it came to me, but there it was. And I just started following you. And then all of a sudden we met at the beach house. And then you were connected to Natalia. And then, we had this moment of like, how do we know each other? And it had been such a long time. But we're diving right in here because we carpooled to an ayahuasca ceremony from New York City, so many years ago. And then we're neighbors. I mean, we live like less than a half a mile from each other, which is wild. And man, I mean, my life is filled with these types of things. Serendipity, synchronicity. Some on the lower planes we just call it coincidences, but at this point, I don't know if I believe in coincidences. I'm like totally on the serendipitous, synchronistic track. And the more that those things happen to me, the more that I feel like there's signs from the universe that I'm on the right path. And I just kind of live in that zone, and I love those things.
Me too. I started believing in it actually, not just meeting you was one of the examples. With Natalia, it was also. We had some wild experiences. I think I told you the story of how we traveled to San Juan, Puerto Rico once, our first vacation. And she gave me a gift. She made a reservation on oceanfront property. And when we got there, they told us we don't have oceanfront property anymore. Like, they have rooms facing not the ocean. And it was her gift to me, so I got really upset. And I started like kind of arguing at the hotel, making sure we get our ocean front. So the manager came out, was like, guys, just quiet down. I'm going to promote you to a suite. And we just recently started dating, and my birthday is on 21st, and her birthday is on 21st. And the first movie we went to was 21, but we didn't know any of this at the time, right? And we get to the hotel, and they upgrade us to a suite. And we get to the suite, and the suite is 2121. It's on room 21 on 21st floor. And I just started bugging out because we just like started talking about it. How does even like how a universe works like that? It's like, is this signaling to us? Is there like pointers I'm supposed to take cues from this event? This 2121, So these things that happen. But I wanted to talk to you about psychedelics a little bit and we started talking about ayahuasca. No, I do. I really do, because I'm very much into it, and I haven't done as many experiences as I wanted to. But I also know that, for instance, in Silicon Valley, you don't even get a job unless you are into it, unless you are experienced with psychedelics, you experience psilocybin, because it's such a expansion of your brain and creative part of your brain works very differently. And we know that already scientifically. Of course, it's been dogmatized for years, maybe on purpose, maybe by accident. I don't know. I don't really care. All I care about is how I can benefit from it and how my kids can benefit from it, and how early should, could, and would I start them on that journey, and where would I start. So I wanted to ask your opinion about it because you're a lot more experienced than I am in that. And you're the one who told me that you actually met people that started doing it like at 2-3 years old. You know, so there's no real like age barrier to the entry, basically.
Okay, man. I mean, it's exciting to dive right into such, such a like semi-fringe territory topic. I love the realm of psychedelics, and they've played a big part in my own, personal spiritual development and life development. I will disclaim that I'm not some kind of an expert, quote unquote, and I don't claim to be on anything psychedelic related, but I do have, I've got a fair amount of personal experience, and it's, and they've had a profound impact on my life, and I do believe in the great value that, they have to offer us as tools. So yeah, my first experience with psychedelics was in my mid-20s on a mushroom journey, and that led me to eventually. It was integral in my decision to move from Iowa to New York after I had graduated from law school, and to leave behind the legal world and pursue my dreams. And I had a vision of connecting with other people who were kind of like these beacons of light all around the world, and I knew that I had to go to this place, which at that time was New York City, where I could meet more people who were tuned into this vibration or this frequency, these other lighthouses that, a place where people would coalesce who were interested in, expansion of consciousness. And it wasn't long after I had moved to New York where I was pursuing acting and joining bands, like playing music, acting, doing the New York hustle, working as a waiter and a dog runner, getting my real estate license, living in a tiny little room in an underground dance studio in Brooklyn, that I also went to my first ayahuasca ceremony that I got connected to through my psychedelic acting teacher, which then led me later that year in 2010 to go down to Peru for my first foray into a sort of shamanic training and doing a dieta down there. And getting connected to the plant medicine in that sort of native habitat where you can really dive deep with it. So I kind of like just dove all in, and then eventually came back to New York City and met my now wife. But through that process, I made a lot of friends, international friends, and we have connections in Colombia as well as Peru. And on another journey, another trip that I was on with my wife, we were visiting my friend who's friends with some locals who just do medicine ceremonies in their own way. And this is what you're referring to, Zach. So it took me a while to come to here. But when I was in Peru, it was more of like a formal coming down there for a dieta, being brought down as an American with somebody who had a connection with the local shaman, and they sort of organized it. Whereas when I was in Colombia, drinking medicine, it was just with a friend of mine who is really embedded and enmeshed in the local community of his friends, and they just do ceremonies, and they have their own shaman down there and their families. And it was like, that was the first time that I had just experienced ayahuasca ceremony in a really like hyper local context as a normal part of sort of spiritual family life. And there was a pregnant woman in a ceremony that I was with. She was drinking medicine, so for her and her baby, and there were young children there in the ceremony as well that also partook, and I think drank much smaller amounts of medicine. But that was a paradigm shift, coming from this place in the United States where we have, these are like Schedule 1 psychedelic substances, and they've been classified by the government as potentially dangerous for everybody. And then going to a place where it's, a tradition that's just been around in their community forever, and it's just as normal as, sitting down and drinking tea for breakfast, is that you get together with your friends on any given weekend, or when your shaman buddy is around and in town, and you all set up. You do a ceremony. Everybody's playing music. Everybody's drinking medicine. The kids are sitting together, and you have a beautiful time, a beautiful experience together. You tap in, you do your medicine work that you're doing in that journey, and the kids are just as much a part of it as the adults. So I do feel blessed to have had that experience where that's just a norm. And it does make me think about, wow, what is that going to look like for me in the future, for my children? I have not answered that question yet. I don't know what the answer is, but I do think at some point, I have a 5-year-old son, a 5-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. And I do know that the conversations and the way that we're going to approach, conversations with our kids around consciousness expansion, drugs, and all this stuff is going to look a lot different than it did when I was growing up during the DARE era of the late 80s and early 90s in the United States. Drug abuse resistance education, and there was this this whole thing to like. I grew up being absolutely terrified of anything that you might want to call a drug, because I got that sort of programmed into me from a young age. And, we're in a totally different era now.
Me too. And it's wild, right? Because it reeks of, I don't know, it infuriates me on so many levels, because there's so many benefits to a lot of these stuff. Instead, they prescribe pills to these people that could have just benefited. One of the things I remember, I know Sean Ryan's show, right? The dude that was the ex-Navy SEAL in the CIA, and he was talking about how literally 20 to 40 American veterans commit suicides every single day, and all that could be stopped with just psychedelics being administered to them. Like he went down to Peru to do an Abigail, I think it was the name, Abigail.
Ibogaine, right?
Yeah, that's what he did. And he said right after that, effortlessly, he quit smoking, drinking, doing all kinds of things, being suicidal. Effortlessly, after a week of that treatment, he just completely quit all of this horrendous stuff he was doing to himself, dealing with the realities of, the life he led before and the job he did before, and the realization that came with it afterwards that, as he said in his own terms, we're not the good guys, which is probably a very difficult thing to overcome. When the things you do over there on combat roles, and you come back here and you realize it was all not in vain, but like on false premises, and all the horrific things you did as a soldier you weren't doing the good deeds. So all that PTSD American soldiers are experiencing could have been treated with psychedelics, but it's not, because it's forbidden, it's looked down upon. But now finally the dam is broken. The internet and podcasting and guys like Joe Rogan opening up the door, and Joe had a huge impact on me, for instance, on my realization. Like, everything I knew is bullshit, But it's not just psychedelics, by the way. Let's look at an example of the food pyramid. How about that jip? Like literally, we were taught that all this garbage we were supposed to eat is healthy for you. I remember 20 years ago, I was taking snacks with me to work so that I would eat every couple of hours and keep snacking on them, because that was supposed to be healthy for you. Meanwhile, now we know that is complete bullshit, and you shouldn't eat often, and you should not eat more than like 2 to 3 times a day max, and you benefit from fasting so much, and the food pyramid is completely bullshit.
Yeah, man. I've had my own sort of personal foray into figuring out how the food pyramid applies to my life, because I've done a lot of experimenting with carnivore diet, fasting. When I was younger, I had tried vegetarianism and veganism, and luckily I'm way past that point and have hit the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm in a sort of like a whole foods kind of balanced protein, fat heavy sort of diet right now, that sort of matches the level of like output that I do physically with training and so forth. But I had a big scare, a few years ago with like when I went and got my first lipid panels done. And, I was worried when I was like 37 years old, and I was worried I was going to have a heart attack, and I had a doctor trying to put me on statins and tell me that I had familial hypercholesterolemia. And like I went down the rabbit hole of then getting my own labs done, finding about this subset of people who have elevated LDL as the result of being on a high fat, low carb or no carb, high protein diet, like a carnivore one, which I really was on at the time, but who are also metabolically fit in every other way, who have extremely good biomarkers in every other sense, and then realizing the sham of the science behind the pseudoscience behind, the fat and being bad, and that LDL being the number one cause of potentially, heart disease and all this, right? There's a whole shift happening in perspective around that. And there's all this evidence coming out about how that data was manipulated by the food industrial complex, right? To try to push us onto processed foods, which are now a huge part of the American diet, a likely causal factor in all of the metabolic dysfunction and diseases that we see in kids and children today, and the obesity epidemic in the United States. I mean, I'm not a health expert here, but these are big issues that everybody's becoming aware of right now. And I think it's great that we're talking about this as sort of two regular guys, unquote, quote unquote. I mean, we're not doctors, but like the level of awareness that people now have around what real health is changing and shifting so fast, and there's so many good voices that are out there and coming to the forefront and doing independent research, and that's being shared around in a way that is not just this top-down government telling you about the food pyramid, which, there's the meme around like the true food pyramid is actually inverted from the one that they told us, right? It's like, I mean, that's an oversimplification, but it just shows you how silly it is that we, have believed everything we've been told about what's healthy and what's not. In a world where in a country where everybody's so sick now, and there's a big movement, right? There's a big movement now, and it's even, it's seeping into politics now in a good way, I think.
In a good way, yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what about doctors, by the way? First of all, it just goes to show how we program to believe authorities, because Kaylee Means was on Joe Rogan podcast the other week, and she said she's a doctor, right? She spent absolutely zero time learning to be a doctor or nutrition. They have no classes on nutrition. There's no education on nutrition. And by the way, I took my mother-in-law to a doctor who's obese, literally. And the first thing I thought about, how is he a doctor? Look at him. He's the most unhealthy individual I've ever met in my life. Doesn't exercise, doesn't eat right, and he's a doctor. And he, of course, wanted to prescribe a whole host of medical prescriptions to her disease, to her problems, and she's like, no, you know what, I'm just going to fast. And she just fasted for 7 days, and boom, the problem she was experiencing gone away. And now I look at doctors completely different, because the educational system, the things they learn, I realized that when I was listening to Kaylee on Joe Rogan, I'm like, oh, they don't even teach them what you're supposed to learn. And by the way, you're an amazing example of somebody who went to school for something. You went to law school, you graduated from law school, and you didn't become a lawyer, and by choice, not because you couldn't pass a bar exam, which is a huge testament to your willpower and the fact that you spent so much time and effort to become one, and then at the very end of the road, you're like, oh no, that's not what I want to do. So let's talk a little bit about that. How did that come about, the realization, after years in school and graduating and getting your law degree, not actually pursuing that path, man?
Yeah, well, great segue, because my personal story, I think, is very analogous to hers. The doctor that you just mentioned, who was on Joe Rogan recently, a lot of viral clips going around of her talking about, was it Stanford Medical School that she went to? I can't remember, but she's like,
I think
we
so.
didn't learn anything about nutrition. So I had a similar sort of awakening when I was in law school, about my second and third year of law school, which coincides with that was for me the first time that I actually had my first psychedelic experience with mushrooms. I was actually in my second year of law school, but I was like, these questions were beginning to formulate in my brain, because at the time I remember thinking, here I am at the University of Iowa, which then was a top 25 law school in the United States. So I was at a relatively high level of academic institution in a prestigious way, where I'm supposed to be in one of these places where I have a great understanding of things, right? Like, you would think I'm at this sort of like semi-pinnacle of education in the world, right? Like a top 25 law school in the United States is a place where you're supposed to be like, you should really feel like you know what's going on. And I remember at that time I was about like 27 years old, 25 years old. And I'm thinking to myself, I figured out that I don't know anything. I'm like, I don't know anything about what's really going on in the world. I'm diving into these law books. And what I found out studying the law for me personally was that I'm a truth seeker, right? And for me, the law is not the place to find truth. I care about ultimate truth. And the law is it's non-existent there. You're never going to find it. Unfortunately, is sort of my opinion on it. I'm not saying there isn't a place for law. It's very important, and I learned so much during law school. And listen, the United States Constitution, one of the most important documents ever written in history. I have great reverence for it. I learned a lot about that. I learned a lot about all kinds of different types of law. But case law in the United States is primarily what you're studying and is your guiding doctrine as a lawyer if you're practicing law in the United States. And that's just based on the pontifications of these different judges over time on these specific issues. And there's always like two sides to everything. And you can kind of like just dig into that forever and ever and ever and ever when you're looking for like ultimate truth, and you're never necessarily going to find it. So it's all about like making an argument for either side no matter what. So there's never like a finite answer in the realm of law. And that sort of like just wasn't for me on a spiritual level. So yeah, man, I had that discovery. And then I also, during my final year of law school, took this ethics course. And during the ethics course, it was like our professor was required to disclose to us the percentages of like mental health problems and concerns in our industry. You know, they're like telling us right before we graduate, they're like, just so you know, it's like 85% of lawyers hate their lives. Like 75% are alcoholics. 90% are unhappy. It was like these numbers that they just like. And I remember like looking around the room during my ethics course and being like, dude, F that. I'm out. I was like, I might be in my third year of law school, but you know what? I don't want to do this. And so during that time, too, my second year of law school, I took an undergraduate theater class, and I started getting into acting. And I was like, this is way more fun than law school. I took this really simplistic view. And I was like, I'm going to be an actor, which was kind of crazy. But they were shooting a lot of films in Iowa at the time. And I got an agent, and I booked my first film role, and I got a speaking part in a movie with Brittany Murphy, one of her last movies before she unfortunately died. Rest in peace, Brittany. A lot of weird stuff coming out right now about that and the connection between Brittany Murphy, P. Diddy, Epstein, the weird circumstances surrounding her death. But that's a whole other can of worms. But I was pursuing acting, decided to move to New York against the recommendation of the dean of students who I had met with at my law school, against what my parents and friends and everybody was telling me. They're like, you need to stay in Iowa. You need to take the bar exam at a minimum. And I had actually filled out my application to take the Iowa State Bar, which is an extensive process, just filling out that application, had the checks in the mail, had sent it off, went grocery shopping, had a revelation where I was like, why am I sending in my bar application? I don't want to stay in Iowa. I don't want to practice law. There's a whole other world for me to explore. I want to pursue acting. I want to go meet my friends of the psychedelic universe. I want to explore consciousness. Staying here and practicing law ain't going to cut it for me. And I went back to the post office and was able to capture a guy on the loading dock in the back of the post office after my bar application had already been postmarked, and they were loading it into a truck. It was like, we're talking about serendipity. I mean, the moment that I pulled up, this guy was loading my bar exam envelope into the mail truck, and I convinced him to give it back to me. I think perhaps illegally, because it had already been postmarked, right? And I was like, that's my bar application I just sent. And this guy that was just loading the mail truck on the loading dock in the back gave it back to me. So I still have my postmarked bar application with the check and everything written. And that was like the moment my life changed. I moved to New York City, never looked back, decided I didn't want to be a lawyer, never regretted it. My life's gone in many different directions since then, but
what a wild story.
Yeah, that was a big moment for me.
What a wild story, man. What a wild story. But, when my previous partnership, when my partner was a lawyer, And that's when I learned that 1/3 of lawyers are clinically depressed. And
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, what am I?
Exaggerating the numbers, by the way, earlier I was exaggerating those numbers. I said 85%. I don't remember what it was, but
Yeah,
but
it's very
it's a
high.
very
Well,
very high. Sorry, go ahead.
To, like, let's talk a little bit about a college education. I wanted to ask your opinion about it because if your daughter wasn't 5 right now, if she was 17, would you recommend her going to college today?
Oh man,
Tough one, right?
Yeah, tough one. But I mean, I think we'll have to see where things are at when she is 17. Right now, as of right now, I'm definitely not in the boat of believing that you absolutely need to go to college necessarily to be successful in life. Maybe depending on what you want to study, depending on the specific area that you're trying to focus on and what you want to do with your life, maybe it makes sense. But like when I was growing up, it was like you have to do that, you must do that, everybody must do that. If you don't do that, you're a failure. And I certainly don't believe anything close to that at this point. So it depends. Maybe by the time my daughter's 17, she'll have her own successful multiple businesses going, revenue streams, doing this and that, and who knows what else, or performing here, or selling her wares here and there, or be a successful, I don't know, in a lot of ways, doing kid entrepreneur stuff like what you've been teaching,
awesome.
right? I want to teach my daughter how to do that stuff.
Look at what I'm wearing. You know what this is?
It's hard to see.
My daughter is also 5, right? Hey, it's bracelets, bracelets.
Yes.
So my daughter is also 5, and she started making these, and she's going to start selling them at Sky's hockey games. She's becoming an entrepreneur at 5 years old, which
Awesome.
Is even younger than Sky when he was started, when he was 6. But in my opinion, here's what I think. I think the number one advantage of college, at least my dad preached it to me, and when I went to college, I learned that to be true, is connections that you make there. And that's why it's important to go to top schools, because you're going to build connections that will last you a lifetime and open doors that otherwise would never be open to you. And I think that's very important. However, I think today that can be replaced, because education in colleges, by the way, is not the best education. Today, you can sign up for Jordan Peterson Academy and learn from the best professors in the world. So why would you go and learn from the average professors in the world? YouTube, you can learn anything you want. Social media is here. If you want to learn a subject, you can learn a subject. You don't need to go to school for that. Connections, the same thing. Today, you can go and be part of amazing masterminds where unbelievable people get together and they share, and you become part of that circle, and you can learn a lot more from those people and generate legitimate friendships that will last a lifetime, just like you would in college. But here is the flip scenario. Imagine instead of going to a 4-year college, you become an entrepreneur, you start working for somebody, becoming an apprentice, learning from them, investing that money that you're making into masterminds, going and meeting places, and in 4 years' time as an entrepreneur, you'll be miles and miles and miles ahead of anybody who's going to go to college and learn some kind of, whatever degrees they teach there, with the exception, of course, of certain things like electrical engineering or medicine. Those are the only 2 exceptions that I would make in that sense. But everything else, I think there's a much better path forward than traditional formal education. And by the way, which is no longer required by top companies in the United States for hiring. Google doesn't require it. SpaceX, all of them dropped the requirements for college degrees.
Yeah, and that's not even to mention like the costs associated with college, and whether it's worth the money and the investment that you're putting in, and where that money is really going, and then also not to mention the potential. I mean, look, it's no secret now that a lot of people view colleges as being a sort of, halfway, if not full-on indoctrination, political, ideological indoctrination centers, that have nothing to do with preparing, kids for the real world, and everything to do with, turning them into political activists, with no work skills. So, there's that whole, that's not even, you didn't, nothing you mentioned even talked about that, but there's a whole other, real level concern in those ways about college.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the woke virus, right? The woke mind virus, as Elon puts it. Because it's a real thing. I didn't even think it was that real until I actually observed that. And now my nephew is in college and he talks to me and he tells me he sees it all the time. How people, his friends, get into school, and they're just normal kids. And then 2 years into it, they're completely, brainwashed. Thankfully, he's got me and my brother, who's his dad, right, that are like Soviet born, Soviet raised. So we don't take no bullshit and we say things like it is. And he's got that. But a lot of those other kids don't have that. So, like, for instance, like, how do we protect kids from this woke virus mind? Which, by the way, me and you live in a very virus-infected environment. Most of our neighbors and their kids and all that, like, we know that. We know that about them. And they vaccinated their kids against COVID when they shouldn't have. There was no need for that. That's all part of this brainwashing structure. I feel bad for them. I feel terrible for them. I feel terrible for their kids that got injected with something they shouldn't have injected with. I feel bad for those parents that now realized what kind of horrible mistake they made. Imagine being in that spot. What a horrible burden to bear. Being in a spot of a parent who got influenced by the propaganda machine 4 years ago and now realizing, oh my God, what have I done to my child?
Yeah, I mean that's a really tough one, because there are so many parents that are in that position right now, and I think that the cognitive dissonance, unfortunately, is so strong that most parents that maybe even feel that way deep down, they can't even allow themselves to think about that, because it would be too traumatic to understand and believe that, wow, this is damaging to my child, and it's because of me. It's because of the choice that I made. I mean, that's like a harsh reality to face that no parents like want to have to face, and perhaps a lot of people are never going to be able to admit to themselves. And I'm not saying that like every child, who's been vaccinated by a COVID vaccine is in a terrible place or is going to be horribly ill, but some of them that has happened, and who knows how many that it will happen. I mean, the fact is that it was untested, unproven, certainly not the quote unquote safe and effective 100%, tried and true thing that it was made out to be. I don't even know how much we can talk about this. Honestly, this is like without being censored.
No, we can talk about it. I'll tell you, because I don't post this podcast on YouTube for that reason. YouTube shut me down, and I don't go there. We're on X and Rumble. We talk about anything we want to talk about. I don't care for YouTube. I will never post this podcast on YouTube. I'm not playing games with the censorship regime. That's why I love Elon so much. And Rumble, X Rumble is where we rock. And you know what? I think it's important to talk about it, because these parents have a way out. I'll tell you, it's important to talk about because Peter McCullough, who was the most published heart surgeon in the world, who was on Joe Rogan talking about it early on, that this vaccine should not be administered. He now has a protocol of how to get the shit out of your body. At least I've heard my wife talk to me about, hey, we got to look into this. And maybe because my nephew was forced to be vaccinated in order to stay in college, which is a horrendous thing they did, right? I mean,
unbelievable. So Orwellian, man. It's like unreal.
So Orwellian.
In the United States of America, I cannot believe that people... Yeah, I mean, I'm like you. I'm fortunate enough to have come from... My mother's a first-generation Polish immigrant. I grew up visiting communist Poland when I was a child to go see my aunts and uncles and cousins. I was able to sort of have that experience from a young age every couple of years. And it's like, we know what communism is, man. And, I mean, a lot of immigrants that are coming, that are here from other countries, first and second generation, they understand that. You see that from a lot of people who are from China, where it's even worse, right? Or from South America, from these countries, Cuba or whatever, right? People that are here, they understand, but like, oh man, it's really been bred out of the couple generations of Americans who have been here that don't have that first generation immigrant experience. So I guess it's like it is part of our job as those who know and see this to be out there talking about it and sharing it, because like it's so blatant, it's so obvious. Like it's the same playbook over and over again. I mean, this is technocratic, bureaucratic, like this is techno-communism, and it's right here in front of your face. Nope, they're not even hiding it. I mean, it's like, boom. Sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a rant there, but
I love it.
I mean, your question is, what do we do? So I guess, my answer is, I guess I feel, honored to be here, invited on your podcast, and that we're talking freely about it. Because it's a crazy time, man, where you have to like, really feel like it's tough to even be able to have public conversations without fear of getting shut down over this stuff. These are conversations about the health of our children, the future of our of humanity. It's crazy to. The side, you have to understand, the side that's trying to shut you up, those are not the good guys. That's never been the good guys throughout history.
Yeah, my podcast was on YouTube for over a year. We've had over 5,000 subscribers. And then I had a podcast with a friend of mine, Ian Hart. We talked about this. And no warning, no nothing. YouTube just shut me down. Boom. Because I wasn't big enough to even warn me, which is fine. I'm like, all right. And at that time, Elon just bought X. I'm like, awesome. We have a platform. Let's rock with that. I'm not playing games with these YouTube guys. Screw them. You know what? They're going to pay a heavy price down the road for censorship because alternatives are going to pop up. They already are. And people are waking up and they're going to be switching away from... And by the way, right now there's a monopoly antitrust law against them, against Google. So I think if Trump actually comes to power, they're going to try and break up Google away from YouTube. And they're going to go after the censorship regime. Really, really big.
Yeah.
And for instance, when it comes to like voting, I never voted in my life because I don't think it would matter before. Even when Trump became president in 2016, I didn't believe that it would matter. And I was right because he was a lame duck president. The system didn't really allow him to do anything, right? They buckled him down with the Russia collusion, all these impeachments. He couldn't really do anything because the system was against him. But what it did is that it awoke people. And then, of course, COVID was the real thing, the real awakening of the American public. So I'm actually going to vote for the first time next week in the United States because I think this election is the first one that actually matters since JFK assassination. I think before that, it didn't really make a difference.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, we've got JFK's nephew in with Trump now. This is wild, and man.
He's leading the MAHA movement, which is what I'm excited about.
Yeah. Well, that relates to everything we were just talking about.
Exactly.
I mean, I never previously. Having the background that I have, and with my mom being from Poland, I've never been into. First of all, I've never been into mainstream political part. To me, it's the United States, Democrat, Republican. I mean, since I was young, it always looked like a uniparty to me. I never trusted the Democrats or the Republicans. I mean, as far back as I can remember, I think even in my first voting, like when I was 18 and I could vote for the first time. I voted third party. Like I did third party, or I wrote in, right? I voted for like a Ron Paul, Jill Stein ticket at one point. So I've never been like a right or a left guy, because to me that always looked like uniparty, divide and conquer tribalism, right? Which is now that's come to the forefront. That is exactly what it was, man. I mean, it's so much more obvious to see that now than ever before. And, it does seem like Trump is a wrench in that whole operation, right? He's the first one that came in that didn't come from that political class per se. I mean, where he was a career politician, made his own money outside of politics.
That's the problem they have. But I'll tell you why I'm really excited about this ticket. There's one reason. My opinion on the future of the United States. I believe that eventually this empire is going to fall, unfortunately, for the reasons that it can't fight, right? Such as debt, this financial situation that it's got itself into, such as all the things that Ray Dalio talks about in his book, The Changing World Order. But here's where my hope comes in. And I didn't think I would see the day that this would happen. There's one guy in the world that defies odds of the shit that can't happen, happens. And his name is Elon Musk. This guy lands rockets. And by the way, the chance of landing that rocket back to Earth, he said that chance of SpaceX succeeding was less than 10%. He made that a success. Tesla, chance of that was very far gone. Now Neuralink, like this guy has a record for actually making the impossible possible. And the fact that he's joined Trump ticket in such a hard way that he has, and he's going to actually spearhead. Hopefully, they're gonna win and spearhead the Doge, which is the Department of Government Efficiency, right? Is the only chance this country has of actually not crumbling. Is the only chance, because otherwise the machine will eventually tip over. Even if Trump wins without Elon Musk and Doge, it's not gonna reverse the inevitable, in my opinion. This guy is the only chance it has of reversing that trend of poor education, poor health, over-leveraged country, not producing anything, not manufacturing anything, having this bureaucracy that's stringing it along, waging foreign wars it can't afford. This is the only person in the world that can actually shut down the bureaucracy that's driving this country into the graveyard. That's why the only reason I'm so excited about this is Elon like going all in behind Donald Trump, and now with RFK, you know, who is a phenomenal litigator. He took on gigantic corporations and he beat them every single time, which is what they're going to need in order to be able to shut down this federal bureaucracy that is driving this country into the graveyard. They're going to need all that, all decks on hand, all hands on deck.
Yep.
You know,
it's imperative, man. At this point, it's pretty wild that there is this unification, though. This coming together of like seemingly, you know, previously not aligned forces, right? Because RFK was, you know, historically very, very leftist, right? Generally speaking. Same with Tulsi Gabbard from the Democratic Party. She just came out and said she's a Republican now. She switched to the Republican Party. This is wild. I wouldn't have predicted that we would see Musk, Tulsi, RFK, Trump, you know, all together at the same time, like 100% on board, like in the front, in the fight, and that's pulling, you know, that's pulling from all over the political spectrum into this realization, you know, that there's a ruling political elite that is not operating in the interest of the people that it's claiming to represent. Forget about Democrat, forget about Republican. This is the problem, and they've identified that, and they're coming together over it now, and it's crucial. I mean, it's crucial, man. If I don't know, on the other side of that is World War III, you know, so potentially
World War III, and you know what Elon says about Californication of the United States, because they're gonna, you know, give all the illegals they imported here citizenship. These people are gonna vote Democrat, and the Democrat today is not the Democrat Party that it used to be. It's not the party of the people. It's the party of the elites, warmongers, big pharma, been food, all the shit that we hate about this country. That's what they represent. And when I see polling that Trump is like 3 points ahead of Kamala, who's just a puppet, obviously, my only question is, who are these fucking 47%, and what's wrong with them?
Yeah.
You know, like, what are you guys thinking?
Yeah, man. The brainwashing is deep. It goes deep, and it's been strong, man. It's crazy. There's all interesting new theories coming out around who can be influenced in these ways, and how and why really smart people, really smart, otherwise successful people can still be so easily pulled in to this ideology. I'm not an expert on exactly how and why.
That's easy, Andrew. That's easy. I come from the Soviet Union. We have the KGB. We had the KGB. We know how honeypot operations are set up and how blackmail is used to control the elites. That was done for centuries. United States is not the first one to implement it. Epstein list and Didi and all that nonsense. It's just standard operating book by the intelligence services, man. This is how they roll. This is how they do it. And when you see a smart guy like Mark Cuban come out and, like, you know, try to defend indefensible, you realize how it really works. You know, this is the proof is in the pudding. And another.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a potentially compromised elite, but I'm talking about just like regular people that are your friends. You are like really successful, you know. They, but still somehow believing that, you know, this tale that we're being told that what the Democratic Party is pushing is somehow good for anybody at this point.
I think
like
it's garbage in,
baffling
garbage out. Andrew, I
Yeah.
think it's garbage in, garbage out, because I have friends that are not on X, they're on Facebook, and their feed is just complete nonsense propaganda, but that's all they
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so I try to red pill a lot of them, and I'm successful in certain ways because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You know, but if you don't see it, if all you're getting is BS propaganda from one side, like for instance, back in the day, we used to read the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all these newspapers that we've recently learned were just an extensions of the CIA. You know, literally, RFK Jr. was explaining how the CIA in the 80s and 90s, through financial means, took control of the entire media apparatus of the United States. Illegally, by the way, because it's not supposed to do that here. But they did it, and that's why everything we've been reading was just propaganda. And by the way, I used to read New York Times too. I used to believe in a lot of this fucking nonsense. It's just the way it works. But I think the future is going to be very, very different. And let's talk about that, because it's going to be different because of the things that I read about growing up when I used to read Isaac Asimov Foundation, artificial intelligence, robots, you know, traveling to space, to other planets. All that is coming to life. I don't know how many times I've rewatched that spaceship, literally a skyscraper falling out of the sky and being caught by those chopsticks. What a mind-blowing scene that was for me. You know, and our kids are going to live in a world where they probably will travel to other planets, which is now possible, again, thanks to this guy named Elon Musk. You know, and what a dude he is. He just gives me hope for humanity. You know, I'm so grateful that he exists for so many reasons. You know, and now Neuralink is now a thing, you know, and I really think sometimes, would I install a Neuralink if I believe that it's safe, or wouldn't I? Would I want that experience, or wouldn't I? You know, because it's becoming kind of... Think about this. In the future, iteration 5, 6, 7, right? Which is, right now it's first model. So in 10 years, it'll be light years away where it is today. Let's say it's super safe to install. We know it cannot be controlled by anything else. It's blah, blah, blah. And now the reality is those who install it are far more ahead of those who don't. Because you can't compete. This guy's an enhanced version with AI built into his brain, and I'm not. And you can't compete. Just like today, you can't compete without a smartphone or an email. You're not marketable. You're not employable. You know, you also won't be employable or marketable without a Neuralink when everybody's got, or at least some people have it. You know, so what do you think about that?
Yeah, I've thought about it too, and I've gone down the same sort of logical thought process that you just described, right? And that's about as far as I've gotten with it, though, because I mean, it's like it's so unfathomable. Yeah, it does seem to be that like we will get to a point where it's inevitable that like you either have it or you don't, and if you don't have it, like you're gonna be just like left out in the cold, and you know you're gonna be left behind, right? In the same way that right now, like if you're not already, whatever your business is or whatever you're doing, if you're not already utilizing AI and the LLMs that are out there right now for your daily tasks in some way, shape, or form, or to enhance your business in some way, you're already getting left behind just by not being plugged into that, right? So right now it's already becoming apparent, like the wheat is getting separated from the chaff. Like either you're getting on board with finding a way to make AI work in whatever it is that you're doing in your life, or you're going to inevitably fall behind, right? And so the next iteration of that is going to be, well, yeah, if it becomes a thing that gets installed in your brain. But I don't know. I think there's probably going to be widespread pushback, like to, to any sort of. I mean, I don't think it's hard to see that becoming something mandatory, but trying to just keep up and get there by choice and by virtue of competition seems like if the few in the beginning do it and they are leapfrogging ahead, then like everybody's gonna have to jump on board. You know, it seems like. I don't know, man. I think about. I wonder how that like what does that mean for me and my soul and my spirit? Like, it's weird, man, because that's such a, like a materially, such a materialistic sort of operating system. Whereas, like, I think like our whole total aura and spirit is something else, right? That isn't like based in the material world, the essence of who we are. So how do those things connect with each other? It's interesting. I'm not anti-technology, but I don't know, man. My mind can't, I can't really fully wrap my head around it yet, Will we ever be able to? I don't know.
I think we will, and I'll tell you why. Because you have to remember why Elon's building Neuralink, and I think people forget about it a lot of times. The first time he was on Joe Rogan's in 2018, I believe, he explained why he launched Neuralink. And he launched Neuralink because when AI started being developed, and he was at the forefront of that, he started OpenAI, he made it open source, non-for-profit, realizing that we need to develop it together as a humanity. And when he did that, and he went around the entire United States, he spoke to all the governors, he went to Obama's White House, and he tried to warn them that it has dangers, that we need to mitigate or else. And nobody would heed, and nobody would listen. And he realized that if you can't beat AI, you got to join AI. And Neuralink project is his way of hedging our humanity, that AI will not destroy us. Because we don't know what AI is going to do once it's actually AI. Right now, LLMs are not really artificial intelligence or nowhere near that. But it's now a mathematical certainty that AGI will exist one day. And Neuralink is Elon's bet against the fact that it's going to have nefarious ideas versus what we hoped it will have, right? Good ideas. Like Joe Rogan says sometimes, what if AGI will just realize, well, these biological pooping things don't need to exist anymore and just turns us off, because it's going to have all the powers of doing that. It's not going to just give itself away before it has the capacity to do that. It's not going to let us even know that it's thinking that. We're talking about artificial super intelligence, which, if you read the book The Future is Faster Than You Think by Peter Diamandis, where he describes what that would be, the power that it would have, we can't even fathom the processing power of that entity, and yet it's inevitable at this point, and nobody can reverse it, because nobody came together and coalesced together around, hey, let's do this together in a safe way. No, there's competition between the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans, and that competition is driving this path forward, and it's unstoppable. And that's why, for instance, Tucker was talking to Elon saying, just bomb the data centers, just bomb them, just nuke them, because this is the greatest threat to humanity. Because we don't know what it's going to do. We're creating something that we have no control over. And I think remembering that Neuralink is Elon's hedge against the nefarious ideas of the future AGI is what makes Neuralink indispensable, in my opinion. And that's where it's not even like the competitive edge in the marketplace. That's secondary. I think initially we're going to have to install it in like military commanders and these guys that are driving that part of protectionism of the world, in order for them to be able to operate at that level, to see the threats that are potentially coming from AGI. That's where I think is heading towards. First, military application. And then, like everything else, the military does it first, and then it trickles down to the regular public. Once we'll have thousands and thousands of military men implanted with Neuralink, and it's safe, and it works, and they're superhumans, people will be like, oh, why not? I think that's how it's going to work.
Yeah, I wasn't, I haven't been down that rabbit hole of perspective before, so thank you for sharing that. It makes sense to me, what you're saying. I mean, we have to have a counter force. We have to have a good AI that's like under our belt to combat the potentially unrestricted evil one.
Exactly. That's exactly what he's building.
And so we hope that's yeah.
But as far as LLMs, you're absolutely right. Like, I recently, when we launched the service that we did, writing books with kids, a year ago, I had to write a contract, right? And back then, ChatGPT was nowhere near as powerful as today's model. Today's model is way superior, the PhD equivalent level one, the Model 4.0. But even back then, I used it to write a phenomenal contract, and it did it in about 30 seconds. I just made slight edits, the contract was done, and before it would take me, it cost me about $3,000 to $4,000 probably to get a lawyer to do it, and I did it for $20 a month subscription to ChatGPT, which is phenomenal. And now the new model of ChatGPT is absolutely mind-blowing. We work with kids on it, and when kids write their books, and then we assign the ChatGPT a role of an editor and tell it, hey, edit this chapter, tell me what you're doing and why you're doing it, so we can follow the pattern of thinking. It does a mind-blowing job, better than any human could. And that's where the future is leading to. Like Tom Bilyeu says, that AI will not replace you. A human using AI will replace you.
Yes.
I think it's imperative to teach kids from an early age how to leverage AI, how much fun they can have doing it, and all the things that come with it, because it's absolutely inevitable that it's going to be in every aspect of our lives. And that's a good thing, because it'll be a much better doctor. Today, Google's Palm 2 can diagnose way better than a doctor can, given the same samples of data set. Like you take a blood test, this test, that test, you feed that into Google's Palm 2, he'll give you a much better diagnosis than any human doctor will. That's just the beginning.
Don't tell that to all these doctors, man, who don't want to lose their jobs.
Oh, I have no mercy on them. I have no mercy on them. I'm sorry, dude. After they gave
Listen,
us...
I went to a terrible doctor too. I went to a physical. Like I had to just. I went to one. It was like a year and a half ago. Mine was like yours. Terrible. I mean, this guy would like. I couldn't believe this was my doctor. This person. He looked not healthy. Definitely not healthy. Like the opposite of healthy. And of course, this guy was like triple masked up. This is like after COVID. Like the guy had like a face shield and a mask, and he was puffy everywhere. He was like clearly inflamed. Just asking me if I'd gotten this or that vaccine, and I had to request. The only reason I went to this checkup is because I knew that I wanted to go get a series of labs done. I knew which labs I wanted, and I had to tell him that I wanted those labs so he could find a reason to order them for me so that my insurance would cover the labs, right? And interestingly enough, I couldn't even. It was cheaper for me. I couldn't get my doctor to order me a testosterone test at 41 years old. With the insurance being able to cover it. It was going to cost me $360 out of pocket to have my doctor order me. It's like one of the most important labs that you can get as a man, especially after you're 40, because everybody knows, this is common knowledge, your T levels drop, man. Like you want to figure out what that is. It's so important to your health as a man, and being able to keep your body and mind strong, what your testosterone, what your free testosterone is, and then even the related hormones like sex hormone binding globulin. You want to have those numbers. You can go online and just order your own testosterone test kit for 40, 50, 60 bucks. You can go to Ulta Labs online and order your own labs that way, and get a testosterone test for 30 or 40 bucks, And to do my doctor couldn't get Quest Labs to give me a testosterone test that was going to cost me less than $360 out of pocket. What a joke. What a joke.
Yeah, I have no mercy on them. I don't care. Because you know what? I feel like Dana White. Unless I need a surgery or I have a broken arm, I'm not going to the doctor, dude. I will listen to a guy like a Gary Brecka first and foremost, and I'll do my exercise, and I'll do breath work, and I'll take a cold plunge, and I'll take my vitamins, and I will listen to a juice head like Joe Rogan before I'm going to listen to a doctor. Not a juice head.
We've been conditioned into weakness and laziness, man. Men especially. It's unbelievable, like how unwilling people are to take their health into their own hands. It's like body. People talk about my body, my choice. Like your body, yeah, your body. You are responsible for your body. This is your vessel, man. It's your job first and foremost to keep yourself healthy. Like you got to do that. That's your responsibility. People are afraid of that responsibility, and they've been conditioned into handing over that power to these institutions and governments and pharma that are capitalizing on it to no end. And it's in their best interest to keep us sick and reliant upon them throughout that process. So the more unreliant that you are on these outside sources for your own health and well-being, the better off you are. And a lot of times that takes hard work, but that hard work is paying attention, consciousness to what you're eating and how you're treating yourself. These are fundamental things. If you're not doing these things fundamentally, like every day, as a grown man, taking care of yourself, how are you going to take care of your family? How are you going to protect your wife or your children? How are you going to do what's best for the country or the world, or make a bigger impact if you can't like take basic responsibility for that for yourself? That's me just pontificating, being out here on a.
No,
I'll get off my high horse, you know. But
no, it's not high horse. We need to be saying these things. We need to. I hate the fact that like it's this labels fat shaming or guilt tripping. No. You got to bring awareness to people that it's not healthy to be fat. This whole body positivity bullshit is you're literally promoting unhealthy. You're promoting terrible outcomes for people because what's the one thing you wish for when you're sick? To be healthy. You know, it's number one thing. If you're not healthy, nothing else matters, man. And it needs to start in the early age. It needs to start like right now, us parents teaching our kids how to be healthy, how important it is to exercise. Peter A.T. always talks about that the number one all-cause mortality reduction is exercise. You can't replace it with absolutely anything, not nutrition, nothing. Exercise. And it starts at an early age because if we neurowire kids to do that on an everyday basis, and we lead by example, because you can't neurowire your child to do it if you don't do it, because do as I say, but not as I do just does not work. Kids are mimickers. They watch you and they repeat. So, you know, leading by example when it comes to exercise is literally the most important parental aspect you can do for your children, is to exercise and to make them watch you exercise and then help them do that from an early age on a regular basis. So as they mature into adults, it's second nature. It is not difficult for them like it is for me. I have to force myself to go into the gym or to do any physical activity every single day because I was not conditioned that way from an early age. And my kids are going to be completely different from that because I force them, I lead by example, and I make sure that the only thing I talk about every morning is, have we done push-ups? Let's go do the push-ups. Sit-ups, abs. Now that we've done it, now you can have breakfast.
yeah, that's great, man. Yeah, for me, workouts are in the morning, first thing every day too. And I mean, my kids are still little, but they come into the garage if they're not still sleeping and they get up, then they come in and they do workouts with daddy. Like they come in and do it. You know, I show them every day. They see it. It's like, no, daddy, what are you doing? Are you gonna work out again? Like, yeah, every day. You know, it's the same. You know, just instilling that over and over. And I think history
is going to remember people like Elon Musk and Joe Rogan for different reasons, but they're going to remember them because they actually, like, Joe is hugely responsible for a lot of awakening in men, you know, and I think he saved my sanity during COVID, because during COVID, I was like doubting my own sanity. There were moments where I was thinking about, like, am I completely insane thinking what I'm thinking? And then I discovered Joe Rogan. I'm like, oh, thank God I'm not alone. Thank God there are other men like me who think like me that are actually not afraid to speak their mind about the insanity that's happening. And I think he's going to go down on the books for that, for bringing awareness to the importance of mental health, exercise, and all the things that he talks about nonstop, including psychedelics. And, you know, how important it is, how empowering it is to do all these things. And I think our kids are slated for a much better future because of that. You know?
Yeah, I would certainly agree and hope so. And, you know, assuming that we don't... assuming that we don't end up in World War III or whatever it is, you know.
I think World War III is going to happen, but I just don't think it's going to be nuclear. I think it's going to happen non-nuclear.
Right, that's actually what I meant. Assuming that we don't have nuclear war. Nuclear war that's the biggest threat. That's the biggest existential threat to humanity. Is nuclear war, like real nuclear war. Maybe between the United States and Russia. I think that's if that happens, it's over in an instant. Everything.
I don't believe it will happen. I'll tell you why. There was an incident in the 80s, forgot his name, but a Soviet colonel saw on his radars an inbound of nuclear missiles from the United States, and he didn't launch back because he didn't believe that they would be stupid enough to do it, because you can't take out an entire Soviet Union. There's too much landmass would want to attack. So he was supposed to launch back, and he didn't launch back, because he understood that it's the end of civilization, you know. And then it actually ended up being just birds on the radar, not incoming missiles. So I don't think anybody's suicidal, and that's why I believe. At least I want to believe in that, you know. Otherwise, well, optimists live longer, so I want to be optimistic.
Yeah,
Because if it
yeah, yeah.
happens-
No, same, same here, dude. I don't want to project a negative vision into the future.
Yeah, I believe it won't happen. I live better that way. People who are worried about it every day, their quality of life is much worse than mine. So I choose to believe that it won't happen. Even if it will, I choose to believe not, because why would I believe the end of humanity? I don't want to believe in that. You know, I want to be an optimist. I want to raise optimistic kids. Because even if the worst is going to happen, I had a better life not believing it's going to happen than those people who are realist and right. Nah. You know, let's be optimist and wrong, but at least we're going to have a better life. Even if the worst happens. That's how I look at it. You know. But hey, dude, it's been over an hour. I know you have things to do soon, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for coming, and I really appreciate our conversation. I wish we could have more of these, because it's important that we speak up. It's important that we lead the way, take charge, and show courage under fire, sort of.
Thank you for having me, man. I had no idea where this conversation was going to go, what we were going to get into, and like you really just dove in on some topics. And I hope that this was, valuable conversation for your listeners. And I'm happy to be a part of your show today, and honored to be here. And I just wanted to put out there that I really value seeing what you've done with your family and your kids, and that approach, that entrepreneurial mindset that you've brought has been a huge inspiration for me. And watching you guys do your thing in your own way that is really unplugged from the system in a way that most people don't have the balls to do, let's say, and doing it your own way, like that's really inspirational. And I appreciate you for that, man.